Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. In this fourth chapter, Solomon is observing. His observations are marked by certain phrases. Verse 1, he says, I returned and considered. And what follows, of course, is what he considered. Verse 4, I considered. Verse 7, and I returned and I saw. In verse 15, I considered. So there's four phrases that mark his consideration. So he gave thought to four matters relating to life apart from God. That is, these things that he's considering are very prevalent if you live your life apart from God. He mentions in verses 1 through 3 oppression. And we looked at that last week. The world, of course, is a place of oppression. If you live apart from God, that oppression, of course, increases. And it's marked by the word, in verse 1, by the word tears and no comforter. Life outside of the pattern of God is a life of frustration. It's a life of despair. And frustration, of course, and despair, as you look out today, is pretty high. And again, it's the mark of a life lived apart from God. So that brings us to verses 4 through 6, which is the next matter that he gives consideration to. He says, again, I considered all travail and every right work, that for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. The fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. Better is a handful with quietness, this is the conclusion that he comes to, than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. Then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. So in these verses, there are the words travail, there are the words envied, vanity, and vexation. They all are descriptive of agony and torment. It's descriptive of a destructive emotion, emptiness, without substance, that which is irritating, that which is afflicting, that which is troubling. And a life lived minus God is all of these things. These are all characteristic of a fallen and broken world. But again, even more so, to a life minus God, to living life apart from God. So the first thing he observes here is earthly work. And it's not just any earthly work, but he speaks of it as every right work. So he's not talking about works of evil. He's talking about legitimate tasks, legitimate callings, legitimate careers. And then he goes on to state, if you work a legitimate career, why this can become an oppression, why this can come a matter of travail. He goes on to give the reason, for this a man is envied of his neighbor. Those who live life minus God, those who live life apart from God, a chief characteristic of them is envy and jealousy, that they have no contentment. So he is saying if a man makes success by the world's standards out of his career, you take on a legitimate calling, and you're successful in that calling, you will be the object of envy. You'll be the object of envy by those who live life apart from God. This is due, of course, to the fallen nature of man, envy. So a person works a legitimate work. He wrongs no one in that work. He's not dishonest, but somewhere along the line, he will be the object of envy or jealousy. And this has been so since the fall. This is nothing new. Ever since the fall, this has been so. Cain slew his brother out of envy. Now, there are people, because they haven't given it thought, who think, well, that's a good thing to be the object of envy. But when you consider what envy does, it's not a good thing. Again, Cain slew his brother out of envy. Genesis chapter 4. Joseph was envied by his brothers and sold into slavery as a result of that envy taking control of his brothers. Notice Genesis 37, verse 11. And his brethren envied him. His brethren envied him. And we see they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. They could not, because they were overtaken with envy. So to be the object of envy is not a good thing. It's not a good thing because of what envy does. Notice in Acts chapter 7, verse 9. Acts 7, verse 9. And the patriarchs moved with envy. They're controlled by envy. They're moved with envy. The result, they sold Joseph into Egypt. But God was with him. And that made the difference. Again, those who live life apart from God, minus God, they're oblivious of God, are an envious people, are a jealous people. Envy is a spirit of dissatisfaction. Again, minus God, life is filled with dissatisfaction. It is an oppression or an opposition to the prosperity or happiness of others compared with our own. You see, envy always does that. Envy compares. And again, it's not accurate in its comparisons. Envy looks at one's own life, then looks at someone else's life, and says, well, why do they have that? Why do they get to do that, and I don't? Life isn't fair. Life minus God, life oblivious of God, does not seem fair. Life focused upon God sees God and is content and doesn't have a problem with fairness or unfairness. So this is a characteristic, envy, spirit of dissatisfaction. It is characteristic of a fallen world. It is a characteristic of fallen man. But it becomes more prevalent when life is lived in oblivion to God. So this envy or jealousy creates a feeling of resentment towards someone else. It's a feeling of resentment. They get such and such and I don't. And then they begin to resent the person. And Solomon is saying here, if you work a legitimate work and you are successful in that work, God blesses you in that work, somewhere along the line, you will become the object of resentment. We see it everywhere today. Envy. Resentment. Resentment toward the rich. No one should be able to make such and such amount of money. Really. It's resentment. That's all it is. And it is the result of a life lived minus God. Apart from God. That's what happens. So Solomon warns against this spirit of envy. Notice in Proverbs chapter 3. And again, Solomon is the writer of Ecclesiastes as well. But in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 31, envy thou not the oppressor. The oppressor. People today have this mindset that all the rich are oppressors. Well, there may be some that are rich that are oppressors. But regardless, let's say that was so. Envy not the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. Notice in Proverbs chapter 14, Proverbs 14, verse 30. A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy, the rottenness of the bones. Now let's consider Solomon in Ecclesiastes. He has everything. He has everything. But there's a large portion of his life that he lives apart from God. He has everything, but it's very obvious that he was overtaken with envy. He wasn't envious of what other people had materially, but I believe he was envious of what they had spiritually. And that's why he writes so much about it in Proverbs, and why he speaks of it in Ecclesiastes. He says it is the rottenness of the bones. Rot, that which eats away. He is saying that envy eats away from the inside out. From the inside out. Notice in Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23, verse 17. Let not thine heart envy sinners. Now the fact, that first word, let not, tells me that by nature our heart will envy sinners. He says, don't allow it. Let not thine heart envy sinners. But, here's the remedy. Be thou in the fear of the Lord. Again, a spirit of reverence all the day long. Don't live your life apart from God. Don't envy those who do live their life apart from God. Notice in Proverbs 24, verse 1. Be not thou envious against evil men. Again, that word against speaks of resentment, speaks of opposition. It's not be not thou envious of evil men. Be not thou envious against evil men. When you're envious of someone, whether you realize it or not, you're against. Neither desire to be with them. Then notice verse 19. Fret not thyself because of evil men, neither be thou envious of the wicked. Of the wicked. Proverbs 27, verse 4. Wrath is cruel. Anger is outrageous. So you have wrath, you have anger. Wrath is the carrying out of anger. But who is able to stand against or stand before envy? The implication is that you can stand before anger and wrath. But envy is more powerful than anger or wrath. Envy, if it goes far enough, will eventually show itself in anger or wrath. Again, anger is more inward. Wrath is the outward display of anger. Song of Solomon, chapter 8. Song of Solomon 8, verse 6. Set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as the grave. What happens in the grave? Rottenness, rot, decay. And envy is as cruel, as the grave. Again, there's an inward, it's an inward destructive force. And it is a mark, it is a characteristic of those who live life oblivious of God, apart from God. Envy or jealousy is a destructive force. And all of these verses that we just read speak of that fact. It was envy that stirred up hatred against Christ. Notice in Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15. verse 10. Mark 15, verse 10. For he knew that the chief priest had delivered him for envy. For envy. It was also envy that stirred up hatred against Paul. And we read of that in Acts chapter 13, verses 44 and 45. And Paul spoke of this fact, that the root cause of envy or jealousy is carnality. That's the root cause. Again, if you're going to cure envy, you have to get to the root cause. And the root cause is carnality. Notice 1 Corinthians 3. Verse 3. Paul tells the church of Corinth, for ye are yet carnal. Well, how do you know that, Paul? For whereas there is among you envy, it's a mark of carnality, and strife, and divisions. Are ye not carnal, and walk as men? That last line defines carnal. It's to walk as men. It's to live in the flesh. It's to live life apart from God. So how do you fix envy? You live focused upon God. Life apart from God is carnality. And life apart from God creates envy. Envy is also a manifestation of selfishness. It's a manifestation of personal worthiness. You could sum those two things up with the word pride. People are selfish because they're proud. People feel worthy because they're proud. Someone, again, Ecclesiastes 4, the individual works a legitimate job. God blesses. And he becomes the object of envy because other people think, well, I deserve that. I deserve that. I'm just as worthy as they are. In fact, I'm more worthy. They've removed God from the picture. And now envy sets in. But if God is your focus, you look at that person whom God blesses, and you say, praise the Lord. That's God's business. But if you live life apart from God, that's carnality. You become envious. You become jealous. And there are people who are envious and jealous of everything. Why is that? They never deal with the root problem. They're God's people. We've seen it over and over. We've experienced it, all of us. God blesses and people are envious. In fact, it gets so bad sometimes there are certain people you don't tell when God blesses you because you know what it's going to do. And why are they like that? Because they live life apart from God. They live life minus God. They're carnal. We're exhorted against envy. And we have to be exhorted against it because it's part of our nature. Romans chapter 13. Verse 13. Let us walk honestly, as in the day. That is, it doesn't have to be hidden. Not in rioting and drunkenness. Not in chambering and wantonness. not in strife and envying. Strife and envy go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. Notice Galatians 5. Galatians 5. Verse 26. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. He says, let it not happen. Well, how do you do that? Living focused upon God, not living life apart from God. James chapter 3, verse 14. James 3, verse 14. But if ye have bitter envying and strife, there it is again, envy and strife. They tend to go hand in hand. It's bitter envy. In your hearts, glory not. Lie not against the truth. You see, envy isn't interested in truth. Envy is not interested in facts. Envy lies. Envy creates its own truth in order to justify their resentment. Well, I resent that person, but I have good reason. I have good reason. And that's what they do. So we see Solomon says concerning this spirit of envy, Ecclesiastes 4, this is also vanity and vexation of spirit. Life lived apart from God, life lived minus God, is a life marked by envy. So if God blesses, it's guaranteed. If God blesses you in a way that can be seen by others, not all are going to rejoice. In fact, most aren't. Instead, envy sets in. And you can mark it down. The reason for that is they live life apart from God. God does not enter the picture at all. And all they see is you've got it made in their mind. You have no problems. You get everything, and I get nothing. and everything's exaggerated, and it just feeds the resentment. It just feeds the envy and the jealousy. So if you go back to Ecclesiastes 4, we see one of the marks of a life lived apart from God is envy. And I believe Solomon looked at others who were enjoying life and became envious of them. And that's why he wrote so much about the subject. He goes on in verse 5. He says, the fool foldeth his hands together and eateth his own flesh. He's now observing something else. It goes along with envy. He observes laziness. He observes laziness. The fool, this is his character. He's a fool. The fool foldeth his hands together. That is a biblical metaphor of idleness, passivity, the refusal to exert effort. Again, it's a biblical metaphor. Notice in Proverbs 6, verses 10 and verse 11. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, and then notice, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come, as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. Then notice over in Proverbs 24. Proverbs 24. We see here the Proverbs 24, verse 33 and 34. We referred to this last week. He went by the field of the slothful. The conclusion he came to, yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. There it is again, that metaphor. So shall thy poverty come. So shall thy poverty come. So Solomon in Ecclesiastes 4 has moved from his observation from hard and honest work to laziness or sloth. He's moved from one to the other. There's the one who does an honest work. Then there's the slothful. So he's moved from the diligent, the one who puts forth a steady, earnest, energetic effort, those who are industrious, those who are persistent, those who are committed, and those today, many times, and it's always been since the fall, are looked at as the lucky. Well, they're lucky. No, luck didn't have anything to do with it. And he moves from that to the slothful. Those who are negligent. Those who are sluggish. And he says concerning this laziness or sloth, and eateth his own flesh. The slothful person, he's a cannibal to himself. He eateth his own flesh. He's self-destructive. He brings destruction to himself. And Solomon often warns against slothfulness. And we see that throughout the book of Proverbs as well, which is where we'll pick up next week. But again, Solomon is making observation concerning those who live life apart from God. He says they are the oppressed. They are also the subjects of envy, covetousness, and greed. That's his second observation. So let's look to the Lord. Heavenly Father, again,